Welcome back to the Free Spirits Podcast, where we go behind the scenes of functional and THC beverages. I'm your host, Lars Miller, here as always with my co-host, David Gonzalez. If you're finding these conversations helpful or informative, please take a second to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help us grow and keep these conversations flowing. Today, we are joined by Ben Kennedy, CEO and co-founder of Fable Libations, a brand known for its award-winning botanical THC cocktails. They're as layered and complex as any premium alcohol drink on the market. Ben's background is in building CPG brands. And welcome, Ben. How are you doing today?
Good. Nice to see you, mate. Always a pleasure. Nice to meet you, David.
Likewise. Thanks for coming on.
Anytime.
So, getting a premium and complex drink like Fable onto retail shelves is no small feat. Probably explain to retailers what it is. It's not seltzer. It's not copying any classic cocktails like a margarita or anything like that. What's been the most unexpected operational or distribution challenge that you've had to navigate so far?
Gosh, the most unexpected. I think the honest answer is there's a new learning every week. There's building a brand, and then there's the kind of the nuts and bolts of moving liquid across the country in a somewhat regulated environment through seasons, where it's one day it's below freezing, the next it's not. So I think the operational side of the business has been the new side of the business, laws for the group. And I think, when you get into it's like a blooming onion from, is it the Outback that had the blooming onion, right? When you start getting into, it looks more like that than it does a straight line, with state A having requirement, 1, state B requirement 2. The trafficking and inventory control and ability to stock the 1 milligram or the 4 milligram or the 5 milligram or the 10 milligram in real time, that's been the hardest part of this, having got the product on a shelf. I think as far as surprises, we didn't anticipate the tsunami of products that we're seeing. I'd be lying if I said I did. When I look back to our early days, there was, Artet and Uncle Arnie's and Bolt, my friend Damien at Bolt, and just a handful of us. And that felt like there was competition, So now, when it feels like every distressed brewery in the land is launching a THC drink, that makes things harder. But that's where you have to, I think, remain confident in the playbook, the larger playbook, which takes time and money, and nothing happens overnight, and there's trends, and then there's sustainable brands, and, you have to navigate all that, keep the foam under control.
Were there lessons from your CPG background navigating, that tsunami of brands and, your background in building a brand? Has that been able to help you sustain through that tsunami?
Yes, I think so. Time will tell. I'm always conscious of the fact that the world is changing at some speed. So, I think it would be arrogant to suggest that, certainly what I learned stands true in totality today. I think there's fundamental things that we feel confident in, and we have to double down, and that's easier said than done. And because of the noise, the temptation is to, we need to spend more money on awareness ahead of distribution. Well, no, you don't. That's a pitfall, right? Oh, we need a seltzer because everybody's buying seltzer. Now it's a spirit. It's an RTD, and that's a pitfall. I believe in just in my humble opinion. I think there's a real danger that any brand can build awareness for fast followers, and there's pitfalls there, with how you allocate money. So, the challenge, Lars, is relying on everything we know without being arrogant, and using that more to reinforce the fact that this takes time. It's still early. We have a playbook, and we need to stay to that playbook versus being distracted by what else we could do. Our audience may not be the most active audience today, so the question is, can we meet them? Can we go find them? Can we activate them? So there's components of my corporate background that I kind of lean on there, and then the thing that's often I think undervalued, which I've found myself leaning on more than anything, is in an account management role in kind of, big agency. You find that you lean more on EQ than IQ. It's those fundamental emotional, having a respectful relationship with somebody, vesting people in the progress of the company. Not just contacting people when you need something, investors that you believe are strategic, putting in the time to listen and learn. And then the same with our manufacturing partner. And so I think that's the thing I lean on the most, is actually I'm probably 1/1000th as emotional as I was 10 years ago, and I think that's important, in this world.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in what you're saying. Obviously, your team makes a huge difference. Relationships make a huge difference. But ultimately, the way to win, especially at retail, is if you look at it as a partnership to sell product together. If it's just, hey, thanks for taking my stuff, good luck, it's never going to sell through. And so I think that's an important piece to really highlight. The other thing I wanted to highlight, which is something we talk about all the time, and we joke about it on the show, and we even joked about it, when we were having some banter prior to hitting record here, but there seems to be a new product every single day. You use the term tsunami, Lars used that term as well. I use the term commodity all the time. But what stands out to me with Fable is this is a product that stands out in a sea of sameness, not just from like a planogram perspective, but because of the type of product it is. It's not a seltzer, not a tea. You really leaned into real ingredients. And I think the terminology you use is no shortcuts. And, that's pretty evident with, I see the number of awards from High Spirits. That's, beautiful on the box and all that. So I guess I'm wondering, when you guys were in this R&D process, you mentioned that if everybody's doing one thing, you probably are in good shape going a different direction or trying something new, so you're not competing in a sea of sameness. What was that process like to develop this beverage? And you talked about nuts and bolts, dollars and cents. What were some of those trade-offs or decisions you had to just be comfortable with? Because when it comes to premium in this space, there's not a lot of brands who can actually talk the talk, walk the walk of premium. So can you walk us through what it was like to actually craft this beverage? And ultimately, what was that like, just deciding on staying true to these real and good ingredients?
Have you got the bleep button ready? Because the honest answer is it was bleeping hard work. It was a
Sure.
bleeping night. It really was. And I won't belabor this point too much because I feel like I've talked about the how we concepted Fable before. Ultimately, we were doing something, David, that had never been done before. And I think in large part still hasn't been done before. And what do I mean? I'll be very, very specific. Nobody had put Szechuan pepper with cannabis emulsion before, ever on the planet. So there was a scientific question mark over how ingredient A interacted with ingredient B, and then if you multiply that, in our case, 8 times per SKU, you've built a pretty complicated dilemma. Now throw in a pandemic. The fact that the first wave of producers in the space really could handle 3 ingredients, right? Water, emulsion, flavor. And that's why you see the wave of samey products out there, is because there's fast to make, quick to make, there's more of them. So the good news is we got a head start. We've been in this longer than people think. So we were doing the sustainability testing really through 2020 with Vitosa. What is very known now, David, was all unknown back then, to include can liners, the impact of THC on pH levels, some of our ingredients in looking to replicate the bite or the burn of alcohol have a higher pH level. That was uncharted territory. Nobody had put the emulsion with high pH, high Brix ingredients before. So that was really a taxing time. And then I think the most frustrating part of this entire journey was laddering that with a capable co-packing facility in the marijuana space, because at the time that's the field that we were on. And back to something we touched on earlier, and I believe this more than ever, we like to think that in times of adversity that builds character, and I really think in times of adversity you unveil character. see what somebody or a company is really like. And it's in those moments you have to make some tough decisions on, are we going to wait for this co-man forever? Are we going to go in a different direction? Are we going to take the real ingredients out and put flavors in, because that's what this facility wants? And ultimately, David, we had to stay the course on what we believe as parents and what our mission was here, right back to the beginning. And that was never to disrupt cannabis. It was never to give people a cheap way of getting high. It was to disrupt the alcohol use occasion just a couple of times a week.
Sure.
That could be a Thursday night and a Wednesday night. It could be a Sunday night and a Monday night. It would be nonsense to proclaim we're going to disrupt alcohol any more than that. I love a glass of wine. I always will. And to do that again, just to look back at 2019, this was a world without White Claw. It was a world without these seltzers. So we looked at the characteristics of an alcoholic drink. We looked at the use occasion. Why do people drink a nice wine or a nice cocktail? You get into viscosity and bite and burn and flavor arc and all these things. And that's what we've done. Now, we were 5 years too early. I think we've been 3 years too early. I think we're a year too early, and time will tell if that's going to be, a good thing or not. But that's what we.
But now is the time. Now is the time after all these years. So it's a really interesting story. So you've been working on this formulation for more or less, it sounds like R&D has gone on for, let's say, 5 years or so. How does that impact your pricing strategy, your cost of goods? Obviously, there's a lot of R&D you invest in. You come out with a product that it's winning awards for how good it tastes. And obviously, there's a lot of demand for a product like this. So how did you guys go about factoring in that cost of R&D into the unit economics of production and then ultimately the pricing strategy when you went to market? I know online, I think it's a 6-pack around $35 or so. At retail, I think it was in the 20s or so. But how did you guys go about the pricing strategy after these years of doing, R&D?
Yeah, so we separate the two costs, David. So we wouldn't necessarily bake R&D into COGS, more so have that as an independent line item.
Yep.
Yeah, the drinks of cost, at this point, we have 4 of them, 3 in market, but they're all original. They were made by people that went to school and studied food for years and years and years. So there's $500,000 into these products. We think that gives us a moat. I think people are trying to copy. I think that's a challenge we'll have. Seltzers are now popping up as mocktails, and it's like, oh, come on, but each to their own. But the question, to answer your question directly, I believe, give or take, Fable costs probably 50 cents more to make per can than a seltzer, if we're generalizing. So, that has an implication on the consumer. Ultimately, when you multiply, you have the distro and then the retail. So we are the product costs more to make, and there's no getting around that. And we try to defend a 50% margin. There's economies of scale that kick in as you grow, and so we're not overly concerned with margins. The biggest concern I have, Lars and I have talked about this, is where this subsector goes, right? And I think we can disrupt alcohol, and we can find 100 million alcohol drinkers and convert them, or we can build a subsector of weed drinks, and there will be winners and there will be losers. But that's what this will be, right? It will be defined as a weed drink or a cannabis drink, and it will be bought on dose and price. And I think we will have failed if we do that. And I think there are brands and trends in the industry that probably cater more to that, and then there are brands that are doing their best to try and break out of that convention. I think if we don't do a good enough job of meeting the consumer Fable was built for, which I think is probably a 25 to 55. I think it's millennial first and foremost, health conscious but not health obsessed, professional or busy, they have a lot going on in life, they may not know about cannabis drinks. They may have tried the odd cannabis drink. They're certainly not going into a dispensary. They're not drinking 10 milligram, 20 milligram, 50 milligram. They may not drink soda in their day-to-day life. Would they drink soda in their, all these things come into play. And I think if we can continue to reach these people en masse, I think then that cost differential, David, will not be a challenge. I think if somebody's walking into a store and comparing Fable with Cantrip, we're not going to convince that person. Arguably, I don't want that consumer. There's not a fit there.
Right.
And that's not to say Cantrip is worse or better or Fable is worse or better. That's to say there are different people buying for different products, and we have to keep in mind that, not all people are built the same way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you mentioned something in there, Ben, I'd like to talk about before I get into my next question. You said there's 4 flavors of Fable, but only 3 on the market. Would you like to break any news on this podcast or what that 4th flavor is?
Yeah, we can. We always made 4, and I always wanted to keep one back as a safety net, so the company had something to say. And what we're realizing is we have so much in front of us that to launch an additional product at a time when we're actually evolving the brand, we're evolving the packaging. It felt like we were putting a couple too many planes in the sky, and we don't have the resources today that other companies do. There's 7 or 8 of us. There's not 40 of us. So we have it's called Hive Society, and there's a clue in the name there, and it's a drier, more summery drink. Off the call, Lars, I'll show you what's in it.
Fair enough. The next question here is retailers are obviously excited about THC beverages as a whole, but they're often very cautious for many reasons. How do you approach those first meetings with buyers to get them to see Fable as something worth the premium shelf space? And then have you found any particular messaging that helps break down that skepticism on their end?
Yeah, so what we're finding is if you look at each market as a flywheel, I think the things that we've learned in the last 12 months, aggressive sampling, more in our case, because I think we suffer a little bit from there's some vagueness to Fable that we are addressing. In being original, we also suffer from what the fuck is that, and we get that, and when we will fix that in good time. But look, we've had some distros, Lars, say love the drink. We think it's the best tasting drink on the market. We're taking a pass, and they will carry a 10 milligram cola, and it will fly off the shelf. And again, that's not something to get personal or worry about. That's just okay. We have to look at where the market is today, and then we need to calibrate our spend in line with that, right? We believe we'll get where we need to go, but it may be the path slightly less trodden. So we've got to be a little more conservative with where we place bets. So aggressive sampling, boots on the ground is imperative. So every market we go into, there's a full-time Fable sales rep on the ground now, and there's of course a cost implication to that. A centralized merchandise group which we've built. So whether it's Kayla in Iowa or it's Tyler in Tennessee, we're soon entering Georgia. They will contact Don, who runs merchandise, and it could be, look, Don, we need 5 coolers down in Georgia next week. It's peach season, right? We've got a drink with peaches in it. I need collateral next quarter that focuses on, peaches. That's easier said than done, mate. That requires a company be able to, we used to say at TBWA, operate at the speed of culture. It's not quite that fast, but you need to be able to act quickly in the markets that you're in. And that's been a learning of the last 12 months. We've not got Fable collateral in and around the shelf as quickly as I'd like. So we're learning all the time, but yeah, we've had distros that have taken us because we're different, because we taste like, and we had a distro that said, we're taking Fable because my wife said our kids would hate this, and it was the wife that said, our kids would hate this, Johnny, great. that's great because my owners are a little skeptical and they don't want drinks that the kids might get. Oh, that's everybody's biggest fear, So different horses for courses, and different courses for different horses. What we're finding. And on a Thursday, you can get a knock clause, and you can be sat there going, "What are we doing?" And then on a Friday, you get a call from a distro who reiterates everything you're trying to do without you telling them, and that just gives everybody a major lift. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to dig into that a little bit. One of the things that we've seen brands have to kind of make a choice about is this strategy of, are we going to be the everyday low pricing product, which you've talked about? Is it the price floor that has a lot of velocity, a lot of volume, or do we go this premium route? For those that go the premium route, there is that added investment because you have to basically back up premium, but then you also have to subsidize a lot of education because the consumer might not understand what premium is or understand why something might be premium. At the same time, the distributor might have that same. Actually, I would say there's two different kind of schools of thought for distributors. Some might say, I'm not going to take this because it's premium. Others might say, I'm specifically going to take this because I have way too many seltzers. So
100%.
When you guys are coming in and you're talking to retailers, you're talking to distributors, what's that conversation like? How do you position premium? How do you get people to say investing in a premium product makes sense? You don't need a sea of sameness. And the reason I bring this up is we've had conversations with people who are at Total Wine, for example, who are saying, hey, that we're going to cut 20% of our THC seltzer SKUs because there's just too many seltzers. And to me, what comes to mind is a drink like Fable then would be a perfect complement or remedy to that because it stands out and it's different. So how do you actually approach these conversations, and how do you position premium and why it does make sense for distributors and retailers? How do you get them on board and kind of veer them away from wanting that everyday low pricing?
It's very there's nothing shiny about it, David. It starts with the typical assets, the brand book or an edited version of the brand book, that reinforces key values of the brand. In our case, to include real ingredients, product integrity, being original, that kind of thing. And then getting in front of that sales team and whacking them over the head with the same message again. So you're now two interactions in. We have a slide. We have two slides. One that defines today as the era of product, not the era of brand. And we've seen this before with craft beer, and I think the distros lean into that story. Just because we can launch a product, that doesn't mean it turns into a brand. So the assets and the ability to show the audience that we've thought about this and it isn't skin deep. Any chance you get the chance to do that, David, is really key. And then the packaging, of course, the packaging has to be premium without being luxury or without being inaccessible. You want to play that the thread the needle between familiar to the alcoholic version, premium without giving the consumer too much to think about. Then the assets around the shelf. So in Iowa right now we're rolling out these, and I said to Dom when he was designing, I said, Dom, I don't want a cooler that looks like every other cooler. Why would we do that? We want a sleek cooler. We want a cooler that allows us to pull our primary colors forward, British Racing Green in this case. Why? Because that's different and that combats the Crayola palette to the left. It allows us to stage the shelves in a certain way, to control what part of the box is forward facing. And then we have myriad strap lines that basically play on words, the fact that people don't have to settle or shouldn't have to settle. I'll share one that never saw the light of day, but my wife gets credit for this, but it gives you an idea that we're trying to bring some humor to this as well. Life's, at the end of the day, we're not curing diseases with these drinks. We were going to have a couple in front of a fireplace, a roaring fire, and it said, let's snuggle tonight, let's snuggle in front of the fire tonight with a seltzer, and then the next frame would say, said nobody ever,
Sure,
example. tongue in cheek of
Yep.
we're as an industry, David and Lars, I passionately believe we've not even got to use occasions yet. So I say that again, not to disparage, to be fair, seltzer around the pool, seltzer at the beach, seltzer at Coachella makes perfect sense, right? That makes perfect sense. But we haven't got there, right? So I think we've all thrown a THC drink in the mix, and God willing, we don't go down the path of defining everything by dose, which we're starting to see a little bit of. Ultimately, that leads to a race to the bottom, which we're seeing, and that doesn't befit the bigger opportunity. So, the flywheel is at shelf, it's aggressive sampling, it's consistent brand presence, knocking on these doors every day. It's local activations. In our case, we can align with food, with hospitality, with certain lifestyle. And then you just hold your breath and hope.
Yeah, and that's a good way to frame it. I think what stands out to me is I saw the LinkedIn post you had. It was a cooler. I forget the state it was in. Maybe it was Iowa. But that was actually the question I had was, this does look, from a planogram perspective, markedly different than everything else. Like, this catches your eye, the branding of it, the labels, that does preach. It has a premium feel to it. I don't have the exact terminology, but just feels like a premium thing. And so I do think adding context for when you should have that premium product also definitely helps with things like that sell through. But I wanted to take a step back and walk through how you guys chose this audience as well, and who the audience really is. I think we've talked about, for something that's premium like this, you've talked about millennials who are 25 to 50. You've talked about not wanting to just blend in. I think you used the Crayola palette, if that was the right terminology. And it sounds like the demographic that you're honing in on isn't the proverbial cannabis user per se. So since you've been doing this for 2019, did that audience kind of change along the way? Has it always been that way? How has the audience and who you built this product for kind of evolved over those past 5 years?
So I think for us, the audience the audience for Fable has never changed. I think what's changed. Have you ever played those quarter machines at the fair where you're like, I'm going to put one in, and then they all nudge forward, and you're like, I'm going to win $8 and nothing happens. They just seem to teeter on the edge forever. I think it's been more like that, another quarter, and I joke, we wouldn't be here if we hadn't, made inroads. But I think our target audience, we believe, has always been slightly more female. I'd say 60%, and this is who we built the brand for, David, and then we'll get back to who's buying today. 60% more female. We addressed that just in the SKUs, but we have a SKU that originally was anticipated to be more male forward in taste palettes and into the woods. The thing with a premium product is you want an audience that can afford to spend a little more on a premium product. So that millennial audience typically is professional, or at least is busy, has a career, kids, pets, things on their mind. They don't have the capacity to be out of control, in their life. So I think there's a nuance in helping this person amplify what we call their me moment. And that could be a bath. It could be a movie. It could be a walk down the beach. It could be 9 holes of golf. It's not really on Fable to dictate when to use, but I think we've built a product that can live and amplify all these me moments during the week, because it is low dose and it is sipped, and it is very similar to an alcoholic cocktail in composition and whatnot. So yeah, I think that's the main thing. I think we are in the midst, David, of embracing what it means to be a cocktail brand, and what the implications are of how we speak and how we look, to include the colors and the tones of the cans. I don't think we're a sentimental brand, because these drinks have never existed before. So I think to tie a Fable back to a sentimental moment in time would be misrepresentative, because it's a new product. So yeah, these are all things that we think through, but I think demographic is typically somebody that's just looking to take the edge off their day without sacrificing taste. They know about THC. I don't think we're out there in the what's THC land. I think we are operating today in they're educated and they're trendsetters, and they're not at the tip of the spear, but they may be the friend that says, hey, I tried a THC cocktail, I'll bring 6 round to book club or to whatever it may be. The Gen Z audience is emerging, we found, but the reality is there isn't many of them, right? Half of them are
Sure.
underage today. So it's something we do keep our eye on and on our thoughts on how to bridge to Gen Z. I think there are certain brands that have done a really good job of connecting with Gen Z. But again, David, I think the biggest discipline we have, and I think it will differentiate this team in time, is we're so clear on what not to do. It's easy to say that's what we should do. I think it's harder sometimes to say what we shouldn't do. And I think Guinness became Guinness by being Guinness, right? Hendrix became Hendrix by being Hendrix. It didn't become Hendrix because it had 16 versions of the same thing and this and that and this and this, So I think being disciplined in who we're talking to and reminding ourselves it's early, reminding ourselves that use occasions haven't been defined, reminding ourselves that we have a clear, distinct use occasion in being a cocktail company, and then continuing to be consistent in how we reach these folks, often organically. That's what we need to keep doing.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about, so many brands launching, how you guys approach being different, the unique coolers versus the sameness, the colors, you have reps in the market locally, but as far as gathering feedback to be different in each individual market, how are you collecting that data from the retail partners and fine-tuning the presence? You mentioned Georgia peach season and moving as fast as culture, things like that. So how are you collecting that data and fine-tuning that presence individually across the nation?
So through technology and through humans is the simple answer. So we use a software called VIP, to provide real-time retail information. We're at that point now, I think, Lars, where, we need to know what retail stores are on the cusp of needing a rebuy and having our destiny in our hands versus in the last year, we've relied on our distros staying on top of that. I think anybody coming into the space, distributors really, really, really do move product from point A to point B and, not a lot more than that. So, making sure that you have the appetite and the resource and the discipline to take that job on, the sales roll on, even with a distro in place, I think is really key. So VIP gives us that metrics on, on the ones and the zeros, and then allows our humans to go back in and ratify that or get an echo chamber on that, and then on the digital side, it's really interesting, the DTC world. I'm not convinced that lifetime value is matching spend for anybody in the online space, at least the data that we're showing. So we're spending very little on paid media, but we're generating, between $15,000 and $20,000 a month DTC. I bring this up because it gives us a treasure chest of information, as you know. The one that I'm most excited about, we are all, including our investors, most excited about this, is our repurchase rate. We're seeing a repurchase rate online of 66%. Not a subscription rate, a repurchase rate. And that's indicative of the beginning of a lifetime value metric that you can start to then build sustainable spend strategies behind. You're always looking for like a ROAS of 3 to 4 if possible, all in. We've not found that yet. I can't look you guys in the eye and tell you we found that yet. We know that people rebuy when they buy, but we've not found a platform that screams, lifetime value. So I think DTC will have a lot to play out yet. But we're seeing the DTC information echoes our primary target demographic information. The two seem to ladder up. So now it's about finding, how do we reach more of those folks? For every dollar we spend, how can we generate $3 in revenue, knowing that once we get them in, 66% will then rebuy 2 or 3 times. And then you bring in your subscription models, all that stuff.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I've noticed a similar trend. I think back, I'll call them the early days, like 2022, your CAC's around 15, $20. Your ROAS is in that 4 to 5x range. And what's tricky now is because it's so much more competitive. That's what makes it, obviously a lot of more people bidding on those same audiences. But I would also say B, I haven't gone down this rabbit hole yet, but there's a lot of people who are convinced that advertising with meta and like being health and wellness focused, and you could argue THC beverages can fall under that umbrella, makes it a lot more difficult to see those contribution margin numbers you would need to justify throwing more spend at something. So I think I applaud the people who can crack that ratio, but it is getting more and more difficult as this gets more and more commoditized. Maybe there are segments, markets, audiences that people have found that are really working for them. But to your point, I think a lot of people just throw money at it and think that it's going to print money for them, but you need to be cognizant of that CLV calculation and make sure, okay, if I'm not making money off that first purchase, am I making on that second, third, fourth, etc. 66% is very, very healthy for a repeat purchase. So that's great to hear.
Yeah,
my last question for you was, I get in this nice habit of just stalking people's LinkedIns before they hop on the show. So I did see you have a background. I think I saw that you had an exit at some point in your career there. And so it got me wondering, Fable has been something that's been growing for 5-6 years of R&D. What are the next 5 years like for Fable? Is there an exit somewhere in there? If so, what would that look like? Walk us through where you think Fable goes next.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll give you my absolute honest feedback. The angst I've struggled with of late, David, is the realization that we're actually building a business now for an outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the path we've taken. We've raised just under $3 million to date. We're in the middle of a bridge round that should take us, should we execute on our model. The bridge round takes us to one more round, a Series A, Q3 of next year. And, if all is well, that should put the company, year end 2027, 2028 in a real good position based on conservative numbers, right?
Great. Yeah.
So yeah, we have to now build to outcomes, and show growth, and continue to build belief, and surround myself with smarter people than myself, than I, and that's the plan for us. As far as acquisition, my personal dream would be a Diageo one day, because it's where I started my career working on the Guinness. I was a TV buyer on the Guinness campaign back in 2005, and I've been fortunate enough to be part of some Diageo founder summits over the last few years. So it's a company that I think that gives a lot back. But there's a myriad of opportunities, I think, as this sector continues to grow, and I think Fable is a responsible, well-built, company that just executes. And we aren't the loudest kid in the room, and we're not the brightest kid in the room. We're not as rich as a lot of kids in the room, but I think we're steadily showing progress. And I think with every day we get closer to our addressable audience, and that really excites me, because I think that would be a a pivotal moment, David, if we can get on the shelves of Safeway next to Cutwater,
Mm-hmm.
versus buried in a cannabis aisle with 30, 50, 100 milligram ointments.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we need to be, So
absolutely.
yeah.
Love it.
Well, thank you so much, Ben. It's been a great hearing all of your insights and everything you're doing to help build Fable and the industry as a whole. So where can people learn more about you and the brand as well?
Yeah, so drinkfable.com. You can also buy Fable through, our friends like Kim at Soberish. She's been a great partner. So Lars, yourself, so there's friends out there that you can buy through. And then, we're in the obvious, the Total Wines of the world. We're in Iowa, Tennessee, Minnesota, Ohio. And yeah, I think there's some big news coming with regards to what distribution looks like for us moving forward. And yeah, apart from that, guys, yeah, thanks for everything and for entertaining me. I think my
Of
F
course.
count was low.
It was very good.
It
Surprising.
was very controlled. Can I shout out, Lars? I've heard you ask before. There are some great operators out there. Chris Fontes, High Spirits, Damien Bolt. I think these guys. I have a soft spot for the folks that just keep their head down and do. And Damien and Chris are two of those guys. So check out their brands.
Nominating our next guest. I love it.
Yeah, so we'll have to bring Damien in, and
The F count is going out the window if you bring your Damien on. I'm telling you right now.
And we had Chris on, I think, episode 5 or 6. So if you listeners, if you're still here, go check that out. And also for everyone listening, if you find value in these conversations, please leave us a review, rate us, and share with someone who wants to get a better understanding of the functional beverage industry. And until next time, guys, cheers.